instructions. It's kind of a pain when you're working in a group where you go to a retreat and you've got these great big sets of instructions. All of our instructions can be downloaded so that they're just like the pattern, 8.5 by 11. It's a nice way to take your instructions with you to class. One of the things, I laminate these because they were with me at booths, but one of the things that I do is there's a chart in here. Remember at the beginning I said you can make 10-inch squares, you can make 3-inch squares, you can make 12-inch squares, but all of the numbers that you need are on there. One of the things that I like to do is highlight the numbers that I'm working on for said project. And this is, do you guys know about glow line tape?
Yeah.
It's great. Because you put it on, you take it back off, and you change it, whatever. But that's one of the things that I do. But this chart has all the information you need to be able to make a 3-inch block, a 6-inch block, an 8-inch block, a 5-inch block. All those, the size of the diamond strips, the size of the background strips, and that makes a whole lot more sense to you now. It also has a number, what do we call it? Approximate number of diagonal cuts from a full width. So if you're figuring math for a project, that full width of fabric is usually about 40 inches. How many diagonal cuts can I get out of the full length? You need 4 for every block, okay, because those are, and so it'll give you an idea when you're figuring yardages. For those of you who don't know, all of my tools have free online videos as well. You can go to the website, easiest way to find them is go to the video page and then you can watch. And a refresher, because real life happens, you go home and you're gonna finish this, right? Mm-hmm. And then this happens and this happens and this happens and it's 6 months and 6 weeks and it doesn't get done. So that's here. On the back, there's a little free project. I couldn't pack it because I didn't have room. I was lifting up the thing, it's like, oh, that's too heavy, that's gotta go. But this is a free sampler, and it is a chance for you to try all the different sizes that are on the tool. And so if you're making the 3-inch blocks, you would go to the chart, make the 3-inch blocks. I might actually have this, I don't know whether it's in there or not, I think it is. But anyway, there's a free project on the back, and you can make that as well. All right, questions about what we did? Y'all, again, you guys are doing an amazing job. You're doing amazing work. If you're going to make this particular project, which most of you probably are, how many of you have ever set things on point? Oh, good, most of you already have. I never know whether you have or whether you haven't. When you do this and you look at the instructions, you're going to see that you're going to be making diagonal rows when you set things on point. Now, when you're going to make a bunch of these, I don't know how many there are, I have to count them. But you're going to be making a bunch of the star blocks, but then there are other blocks that you need to make, and this is a fat quarter friendly, and the other blocks that you need to make are half square triangles, and then you need to make blocks that are quarter square triangles, and then you have these that are on the edges to make this
setting triangles.
Setting triangles, correct. Do you guys know the difference between half square triangles and quarter square triangles? It all has to do with the grain line. And when I was making this, and this is actually fabric that isn't even in quilt shops yet. It's going to be showing up in quilt shops probably in the next, we're in January, probably in the next 3 or 4 months. It's called Tranquility.
So in other words, it will show up in about 6 months since your fabric was supposed to be out in November.
I know. Okay? Because those ships are sitting off base. But this is called Tranquility, the fabric line here. And I was working with this as fat quarters, and it was pretty easy to cut the 2.5 inch or the 2-inch strips. But I thought what I would do is talk to you about how I cut some of the other shapes out of there, rather than just what's in the instructions, okay? What's in the instructions, it'll tell you to, especially for these guys, to cut these all as big squares. And if you do that, what you end up doing is you end up, for the setting triangles around the outside, you end up having the same, you have this repeated twice and this repeated twice, and you may want more of a mix. So when I'm making the half square triangles, which are the ones that are in the center here, what I do is I make freezer paper patterns. It tells you in your sugar and spice pattern to cut squares that are 7 inches, and then pair them up, make your stitches, and make your half square triangles. But I wanted to be able to add more variety. So what I did was I took freezer paper. If you've never used freezer paper, this is like one of my favorite things to use in the quilting room. I made a 7-inch freezer paper pattern, cut the line there, and I added where the grain lines need to be. Because if I'm making these half square triangles, I want the grain lines to be on the edges of that square. And then I use this on a fat quarter or on a scrap to be able to cut half square triangles that I could then team up with, you know, the background. That's easy, make your 7-inch squares and cut them in half. But it allowed me to make those with more variety around the outside. And I did the same thing with the quarter square triangles that become the edges. Instead of making this big square, cutting it on 2 diagonals to give me 4 of those colors.
But the only quarter square are the corners and the.
Well, these are the quarter squares and
Right.
these are quarter squares.
Those are, oh, okay.
The setting triangles. Okay, I'm primarily talking about the setting triangles right now. We'll talk about these in just a minute, okay? But the setting triangles are quarter square triangles. Those are triangles that you want to have the straight of the grain on the long edge. And in the instructions, in the sugar and spice, it will tell you, I can't remember the size, it will tell you what size square you need to cut. So that when you take that size square and you cut it on 2 diagonals, you are going to create these with the grain line being on the long edge for stability in your building. But again, instead of making this out of this and ending up with 4 of those, and really, I only wanted 2, make yourself a freezer paper template. Cut it the size that's in the instructions, cut it on both diagonals, add grain lines, indicators, so that you're not, so that when you're placing them on a fat quarter, you're making sure to get the grain lines. So instead of taking all my fat quarters, chopping them up into big squares, using 2 and ending up with 2 in the scrap bag, I only ended up cutting the 2 that I needed. That's going to give me more of my fat quarters to be able to cut up into the 4-inch or 4.5-inch pieces that I use for the scrappy around the outside. Does that make sense? You know, I'm starting to blah, 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 you know, feel like I'm babbling here. But this is something that I do. I like to use as much of the fat quarter as I can, but I hate to throw it away. But there's only one way to, you know, to do these things is with a template that's. And so freezer paper, and if you have, how many of you have never used freezer paper? The neat thing about it is you can take it, press it with a hot iron right onto your fabric, cut around it, and then peel it off and use it again. So you can use it multiple times and it doesn't cost anything to really do this kind of stuff. These quarter square triangles here, I think they'll have you cut them 4 squares, 7.5. 1, 2, 3, 4 squares at 7.5, and then build your quarter square triangles. So these I built just like I would, because this corner, this corner, this corner, and this corner have all the same fabrics in them. So I did that just like I would build normal quarter square triangles, hourglass units. You know, I put those, you know, can't remember, maybe put those 2 together, and then build it that way. But those 4 corners, but there's so much else going on that you didn't really notice that those 4 corners were all the exact same 4 fabrics. And out here, these are just totally arbitrary. I take whatever's left of my fat quarters after I build the center of the quilt and cut it 4.5, 4.5, 4.5. Sometimes they're short, sometimes they're long. You know, I just cut them all different lengths, and I actually chase these around the corner I put this one on down to here, and then put this one on. It actually stopped at the white border and started down here, so I kind of chased them around until I had what I needed. Make sense? Good. Then I'll expect to see photos. Everybody, next Friday will be good. I'll be home. Not this Friday. So that's kind of the wrap up for this. There are some challenging pieces putting this together, and it's when you're matching those points. I do tend to press those open, and because you've got so much bulk coming right there. But there's not a lot of them. You've got, 2, 4, 6, 8, not too many. The rest of this is pretty easy because you're putting it up against plain squares, and so you don't have too much problem. So, questions, thoughts, critiques? You guys are all getting tired too. Okay.
I think you've done a great job teaching us. So.
Oh, well, thank you. Lots of practice. Now, I do want to share with you, just stay here. Let me go down here and grab this stuff.